In Israel, a boat carrying an elite squadron of Israeli commandos makes a stealth approach towards Beirut. They're on a mission. They are there to revenge the Munich Olympic massacre a year earlier. The commandos jumped into driven vehicles once they got to the shoreline, and off they drove. They looked for 12 targets, all leaders of what was then the PLO. The soldiers, for the most part, wore civilian outfits to not be noticed, except for two leaders of the squadron were dressed as women, one brunette, one blonde. In a busy urban community, you need to know who you're following. So you follow the brunette wig or the blonde wig as you're heading off to get to your target. The mission was successful for the Israelis, unsuccessful for the Palestinian Liberation Organization, who lost almost a dozen of their leaders involved in the terrorist attack on the Munich Olympics. Overall, a good day for freedom. But when he got back home, one of those soldiers had a lot of answering to do.
Apparently, he had not taken off all that makeup and it's blue eyeshadow going on. That's what his wife says.
Just a little bit of blue eyeshadow. He did not want to tell her very much about the entire mission. He didn't even want to tell her why they were away, but he had to fess up, had to tell the truth, because in this case, the truth was better for his relationship than lying. He told her what happened. As it turns out, it was 1973. The soldier's name is Ehud Barak. He became the Israeli prime minister much later in his career, and he's trying to be the Israeli prime minister again. I was born in Israel around that time, 1972. For me, people like Ehud Barak and the team that did what they did in Beirut and were able to end the massacre in Munich, those people are heroes who were able to give my family and my parents an opportunity to succeed. At the end of the day, I don't think Israel would be where it is today and a real proponent of progress in the Middle East if it weren't for people like Ehud Barak who are fighting the fight, which is why tonight's show is kind of a mixed one for me, Tracy, because some of what we're reporting is not going to be as positive about Israel, but it's important that we get out the facts. You and I have a commitment to the truth and to each other, and so we agreed a long time ago we're just going to follow the facts wherever they lead, and here's where they lead today.
Ehud Barak. Going forward tonight, he's going to be one of our central figures, so keep your eyes on him. He's 77 years old now.
He's done pretty well for himself. He's earned a lot of money.
I think his net worth is like 10 to 15 million. It's doing pretty good. And it's reported that he made a lot of that money through real estate. He's the leader of the new Israeli Democratic Party, and they're hoping that it will be him who can unseat Bibi in September in the recalled election.
We're hoping that too. You don't have to ask me whether I support Bibi Netanyahu or a left-wing leader in Israel. I try to be as dispassionate as possible. But Ehud Barak is a hope for a lot of people who don't view Bibi Netanyahu as the right kind of leader for Israel.
Now, our story tonight is the secret life of Jeffrey Epstein. Let's see what he has to do with Barak. First of all, back in 2004, you guys know that guy, Les Wexner. He's a really good friend of Jeffrey Epstein's. In fact, that mansion townhouse in Manhattan was once Wexner's and it was given to Epstein. Okay, so in 2004, Wexner's foundation, while Epstein was the trustee, gave $2.3 million to Barak. This was for some kind of research, and I should probably put that in quotes because nobody actually knows where that money went. There's no evidence that any research was ever done.
Barak has a spectacular apartment in Tel Aviv, by the way, where he's combined 5 apartments into one. That's just a lot of money, especially in Israel. He's certainly been able to raise funds over the years. He might have been doing some real research, maybe not on his own, maybe with other people in the scientific or technology community in Israel.
Let's skip to 2015.
Right.
11 years later, Jeffrey Epstein gives Barak another $1.5 million.
Not bad.
This week, there's been a lot of reporting coming out, and Barak's had to answer for this connection that he has with Epstein and why he was receiving these millions of dollars.
Why did Jeffrey Epstein, this financier from the United States with a questionable criminal past, need or want to give $1.5 million to Ehud Barak, which he essentially used in a startup later on? That is the big question of tonight. And within that is an array of interesting information. The history of Israeli agents in the United States is very complicated. You rarely hear about them because, by definition, a secret agent does their stuff in secret. It's rare for their stories to reach the public. It's even rarer for them to face any prosecution or go to the courts or anything like that. except for in 1987. 1987 was a really interesting year because that's the year Jonathan Pollard, a former Navy intelligence analyst, pled guilty to providing top secret classified information to Israel. Not just any top secret classified information, like the entire National Security Agency's handbook on how they surveilled the entire world and Americans. He probably went too far, would be my guess. The book was thrown at Pollard. He got the highest sentence. I love Mike Wallace. He's a former colleague of mine, and he at 60 Minutes was able to get Pollard to sit down for an interview. That is vintage 60 Minutes, vintage Mike Wallace. Here's what Pollard had to say about what he did back then. And when you hear this, keep in mind the justification he's providing as to why he did what he's doing.
I think it's important to admit now, as I have all along, that I am not above the law, that I deserve to be punished for having broken the law. There is no excuse for the breaking of a law. There is an explanation, however. Not an excuse, but an explanation. And that explanation is the hard reason why I did what I did was because I had become aware of Mr. Weinberger's agenda in Washington with regard to Israel.
Which was to abandon Israel?
It was fundamentally to place Israel in a position where she would be forced to make an unenviable choice between a ruinous war or shameful peace.
Jonathan Pollard was a spy.
Absolutely.
He pleaded guilty. He fully cooperated. He helped the government in its damage assessment. He spied for a country which was an ally of the United States. He tried to give Israel only information which he believed was necessary to Israel's survival and would not jeopardize the interests of the United States. Those are not defenses, but those certainly argue against the maximum possible punishment, which is what he got.
Alan Dershowitz defended Pollard and then also defended Jeffrey Epstein in his Florida crimes.
47 years old. That's how old Dershowitz was then. He's now 80.
Looks a lot different, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's missing that kind of signature mustache. He should try it again. It was a very good look. You know, Dershowitz has always been around these kinds of stories. He's a big defender of Israel. He supports Israel. And yet there he is defending an Israeli spy. It's interesting that he also defended Epstein later in life. We're not drawing any direct conclusions from that. We also should note that Dershowitz is thought to have been caught up with one of these teenage girls in one of Epstein's homes, whether it was Palm Springs or on the island.
Yeah. He's doing the media circuit now, defending himself. You can't log on to Twitter without seeing something about Alan Dershowitz.
The guy cannot stop talking, and he's got a lot to defend against right now. He might be still doing this on behalf of Epstein.
Pollard was unusual because he was actually tried and convicted. Whereas there's a lot of people that are doing some spying for Israel that never get tried. One of those guys we talked about last show, his name's Robert Maxwell. That's right, Ghislaine Maxwell's father. He was also an Israeli asset.
I mean, that's kind of amazing. I mean, who not only was Robert Maxwell's daughter, spends her life connected to Israel, moves to the United States, meets Jeffrey Epstein, and becomes his go-to person on almost everything. They called themselves best friends, but of course it was much more than that. There is a lot of speculation that Ghislaine might have turned and cooperated against Jeffrey Epstein in this current prosecution. It is hard to believe that she's not being prosecuted. Knowing her connections to Israel, knowing Jeffrey Epstein's connections to Israel, it's an interesting collection of people around Jeffrey Epstein, including Dershowitz and others.
That's okay. And there's one more person that you mentioned to me. Pretty Woman is one of my favorite movies of all time.
So there's another great Israeli spy caper. His name is Owen Milken, and I have a picture of him right here. He's one of the biggest moguls in Hollywood. Pretty Woman is one of them. Bohemian Rhapsody is another one of his big movies. So way back when, he smuggled nuclear triggers from California, which is where he lives. And he worked with Benjamin Netanyahu to do this. The FBI knew that both Milken and Bibi Netanyahu were involved in this smuggling of nuclear triggers out of America into Israel and did nothing about it. They just basically let them get away. And that's significant because it tells you a little bit about how Israeli agents are treated when they do stuff in the United States. The guy on Milken's right over there, on the left of the picture, is Shimon Peres. He's the former Israeli president. And guess what? He's also connected to Ehud Barak and to Jeffrey Epstein, because he introduced the two of them to each other. So Ehud Barak and Shimon Peres and Jeffrey Epstein all connected there as well.
Crazy.
Yeah,
Crazy. So Let's figure this out. Epstein is connected to each of Israel's well-known spy stories in different ways, right?
Yeah.
To Pollard through Dershowitz,
Correct.
to Maxwell through Ghislaine.
This Vulcan guy through Shimon Peres. I should also say that there's another spy or suspected spy that is in the news right now that people aren't necessarily paying as much attention to. That is George Nader. Those of you who've read the Mueller report, those of you who are engaged in the Trump-Russia investigation would know that George Nader played a very big role in facilitating a meeting in the Seychelles that involved the Russians, the Emiratis, the Israelis, we think through George Nader, as well as Jared Kushner representative, and who am I missing? That's it, probably. Eric Prince. How could I forget Eric Prince?
This meeting is going to be important later on in the show, so keep them.
People only associate Nader with the UAE and Saudi Arabia, but it should be known that he's actually been considered an asset of the Israeli state for a long time. And that's pretty much open secrets in the public record. State Department officials have always joked about Nader as being an agent for everybody all at the same time. And he's one of those guys who's been able to pull it off until recently when he was arrested. Now he's facing the child porn charges against him, but also new trafficking charges, which were just announced yesterday.
It's my understanding that it's a case of a young man who was underage that Nader was transporting across state lines. So we're really glad that the victims of both Epstein and Nader will get their day in court because these alleged sex crimes are unacceptable. I just cannot even imagine. But if we take a step back, it's a bigger picture. I want y'all to remember there's a counterintelligence investigation going on behind the scenes of the Mueller report. Our job today is not to look at them being arrested for their sex crimes. We're talking about a bigger picture of whether Israel is being investigated.
Exactly. And it's hard for me to understand why Israeli agents would be involved in any of this activity, but that's for somebody else to answer. What we really are focusing is looking at Epstein and why he got away with these crimes for so long. One of the biggest questions that came out of part one of this series we're doing on Epstein was, how did he get away? If he was such a big criminal, how did he get away for so long? And you've been doing some really interesting investigation, Tracy, into his rap sheet.
I have.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
You know me, I do timeline. My timeline with Epstein being investigated for crimes goes all the way back to 1981. And that was based on a deal with some insider trading going on at Bear Stearns. Now, Jeffrey will say that he was not involved in that, and maybe, but it's funny, he quit right after he was being investigated.
I don't think a lot of people know about this 1981 case because it's serious, and he got away with it. He was involved with Edgar Bronfman, the Seagram's CEO, in what looked like insider trading. It was very ugly. Even though everyone defended him at the firm, it was clear that he did something bad, and he managed to get away with it. Bear Stearns, a lot of people consider it a criminal enterprise. So did Cyrus Vance. And there he was in the middle of this giant investigation, and he had to resign his job. He had a big job, didn't he?
He did. He chose to resign. He says it had nothing to do with that.
Of course. Yeah, that was a good bit of luck for him, I guess.
Here we are, 81, 82. All right, let's hit up 87 through 93. We told you guys on our last show that Epstein was involved with a gentleman named Stephen Hoffenberg. Stephen Hoffenberg was later convicted in this $450 million Ponzi scheme that he's alleging Epstein actually helped him with.
Interesting. He says Epstein was the architect of this Ponzi scheme. It's not your typical Ponzi scheme. It's a traded Ponzi scheme. We're talking about lying and cheating your way into growing a much bigger pile of profits. Hoffenberg says Jeffrey Epstein got away with all $450 million. How did he do that? Nobody knows. It's quite an astonishing number to get away with so much money.
In 2008, he made the plea deal for the state charges in Florida. He signed a plea deal that blows my mind. He was able to get away with 13 months in jail, but let's call it what it really was. It was basically house arrest because for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, the man was allowed to go back to his mansion in Palm Beach. That's not jail.
It's basically free room and board. It's not even a jail sentence.
And now he's going to stand trial for new charges in sex trafficking of minors. So my little brain goes, let's look at this. Now, I'm not saying he was committing crimes all that time, but
you're not saying he's committing crimes all that time? You sure?
It's a 38-year crime spree.
Sorry, I wasn't able to put this up on the full screen, but I'm able to now. If you're wondering where I'm looking, I'm staring at the array of buttons, trying to make sure that all these slides show up in time. Sometimes I don't succeed, and Tracy gets to yell at me.
Very
But
well.
this is the slide we were trying to put up. 38 years, 13 months. That's a lot of crime, not a lot of time. It makes you go, why and how? Cooperation agreements are possible and good, but how did he get away with so much crime for so long? Tell me a little bit more. I think we're at the point now where you're going to tell us a little bit more about those cooperation agreements and the work you did for the Spanish actress.
Oh, yes. There was a Spanish actress in the 80s who hired Jeffrey Epstein. This was a crazy story. There was another Ponzi scheme going on in Spain, and it involved even the Spanish royal family. This Spanish actress's dad was caught up in it, and they lost hundreds of millions, supposedly. So she hired Jeffrey to get her money back. Took him a couple years, but somehow he was able to recover it. And
Also about
he got-
$450 million. I mean, it's like this
he
strange
got a
number.
chunk of
keeps coming up.
change, possibly millions, from helping her get the money back.
Maybe he had to do the American Ponzi scheme to pay back the recoupment of the Spanish Ponzi scheme. Anyway, we've been talking a lot, and we've been hinting, and we're leading, and we're dancing around the issue of, was Jeffrey Epstein an Israeli agent? I've looked at this every which way I can. You've looked at it every which way I can. We've spoken to a number of sources. I think it's clear that Jeffrey Epstein was an Israeli agent operating on behalf of the Israeli government. A lot of the activities he was doing can be tied back to Israeli intelligence services. He also has been rumored to have been working for the CIA and potentially American intelligence agencies. We can say definitively he was a secret agent, less definitively tied to Israel, but with great certainty that he was an Israeli agent. That is a fundamentally different thing. And here's how we got to this judgment. There are a lot of signs suggesting why we're saying this and some sourcing around this. Clearly, he was very close to Jewish leaders. He had a very deep interest in nuclear physics, which is important to Israel's strategic foothold in that part of the world.
If I could just he was also known for having meet and greets, brainstorms, or forums at his Palm Beach and Manhattan address, where he would bring really renowned physicists and nuclear experts, and they would brainstorm ideas. And so he definitely had some kind of interest in nuclear physics.
More than that, he would sponsor scientists, the incredibly high level of quality of scientists. It really makes you wonder why an individual would be so interested in something like that. Now, an individual with ties to the Israeli intelligence service, well, that would be a very different thing altogether. And of course, the dead giveaway of why he's potentially a foreign agent, but we think he is a foreign agent, is they found an Austrian passport in his safe when they searched his New York home. It had a Saudi address in it. It was stamped as being used in a bunch of places in the 1980s. And we'll tell you why we think he was using it then. But it's clear that he was running in secret, at least, around the world in the 1980s and 90s. And why would he need to do that if he's not a secret agent? There's also been a couple of people who should know who basically said as much. The most interesting one, of course, would be Alex Acosta, the labor secretary who was involved in the early parts of the scandal for giving Jeffrey Epstein an easy ride.
He was interviewed with the Trump transition team. If I'm remembering correctly, he said he was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone.
That is correct. It's amazing that Alex Acosta would be the one who reveals to the world that Jeffrey Epstein worked with intelligence, and he'd have no reason to have lied to the Trump transition team. But there's also James Patterson, the author. He wrote the definitive book about Epstein. He told New York Magazine this week, it's possible he had a relationship inside the government. Notice he doesn't say which government. So, you got Israeli leaders, you've got nuclear physics, you've got fake passports, and you've got a very interesting amount of very moneyed people from the Jewish community around him, which all lead you to believe secret agent for Israel. Sources have told me that he was as well. This is not just me looking at all the facts that are publicly available. We do have inside sourcing that says that he was indeed an intelligence asset.
I want to go back to what you said about being friends with a lot of really wealthy Israeli American businessmen, because I took a look at that and I was stunned at some of the people that he considers his friends and how wealthy they are and how well connected they are. Let's take a look at this. Ron Perlman, he's the chairman of the cosmetics giant Revlon. He was so rich that back in 2010, he was called the world's richest Jew. I don't know what that means, how you get on that list. He was worth $11 billion. Yes. $11 billion.
I'm a little far away from being anywhere near the richest Jew list. I mean, who makes up the richest Jew list? It's interesting.
And then we've got Wexner. We've talked about Wexner before. He's really good friends with Jeffrey Epstein, but he's the CEO of L Brands, which owns Victoria's Secret and Mini-Me's favorite store of all time, Bath and Body Works. He also has a foundation. Remember that. It's going to be important later in the show. He has a foundation that focuses on the development of Jewish professional volunteer leaders in both the U.S. and in Israel.
And that's where the money came from, to Barak's startup, which we're going to get back to. Now, Ehud
We will.
Barak, keep your eye on him, because the money came from Les Wexner and from his foundation. And there's Pritzker.
Pritzker's really interesting because this guy in 1997, he was the president of the Hyatt Corporation. His family made a plan to go into business with Israel's aircraft industries to build jets. And they started taking orders in 1998.
So we do not know that all these people were involved in anything nefarious. We don't even think they were involved in anything nefarious with Epstein. We do think he's an agent. We do think he was done work with the Israeli government. And we do think that they're all very well-moneyed people who've donated to Israel and are very supportive of the Israeli cause. So
To take a step back and say, okay, what if Epstein was Israeli? Who really cares? There's a lot of spies in the U.S.
this is where it gets interesting. And we're giving you a lot of detail to lay the groundwork for where we're going. It's really fascinating where we do land up. It'll shock you. But it's important because I think what it signals to everybody is that the intelligence community in the United States, the government of the United States, this is not talking about the administration, but the government of the United States, the people running the ship from day to day, are telling
We hope.
Israelis that they've crossed the line. You remember Pollard. They gave him that really heavy sentence. They charged him with this crime. They threw the book at him because he was going too far. And now we've got a situation where we've got Nader, potentially an Israeli agent involved in Trump Russia, and Epstein, potentially an Israeli agent involved with Donald Trump, in jail. Why are they in jail? They're in jail as a signal to the Israelis that they've crossed the line. They've both had long runs of being free in the world, committing these crimes and knowingly committing these crimes to some extent. So why are they getting the signal? The signal is, we're not happy with where you're taking us. The rules have changed.
Zev and I talked a lot about this in the past week because, yes, I believe they are in jail because they committed serious sex crimes, allegedly. They are where they belong. They should be tried, and the victims deserve justice. But I also believe there's a much bigger picture, and that much bigger picture is the counterintelligence investigation.
This is what I think is so important that Mueller gets out this Wednesday. If we hear the same thing that's just in the Mueller report is designed to be just about Russia. It's so important that the Intelligence Committee and the Judiciary Committee, which is hosting Mueller on Wednesday, ask questions about what we've been calling a multinational conspiracy. We're probably the first to say that Trump-Russia was a multinational conspiracy because it was not just Russia. The stuff that is in the Mueller report already tells us it's not just Russia. It also included Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Israel, and possibly China. And you can see in every day's headlines, Donald Trump's affinity to Israel, Donald Trump's affinity to Russia suggests that they were part of what is going on. They're still part of what is going on. So you can't just look at what happened in 2016 in isolation, because it literally was not. Russia was not the only ones involved in getting us to the point where Donald Trump became president.
Epstein's also tied, and I think it came out in that passport because it had a Saudi address. He's also tied to the Saudis and the UAE. That might be confusing to some people.
The notion is that the Arab world is unified against the state of Israel. That's what people understand in their mind, and that's the way it's been told to us for decades. That isn't the truth. The reality is the Saudis, the Emiratis, even the Jordanians and others in the Middle East have often sided with Israel. We've seen that in the many wars the United States has fought in the region. It's those countries. Just the other day, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, said publicly for the first time that he's in favor of Israelis having their own state. We're beginning to see a real shift, a real breaking apart of the old way the Middle East works. And this alliance that we've been talking about is becoming more real. Jeffrey Epstein knew this a long time ago because maybe as an Israeli agent, he was already working with people in Saudi Arabia. And the name that keeps coming up, we can confirm that Adnan Khashoggi is one of the people he operated with in the 1980s. Adnan Khashoggi, who was an arms dealer involved in the Iran-Contra affair, very controversial figure, also did some money laundering with Jeffrey Epstein in the 1980s. That is a significant piece of information because it could mean Epstein may have been involved in the Iran-Contra arms for hostages scheme because Israel was involved. Adnan Khashoggi was the uncle of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post journalist killed by the Saudis in Turkey. It's not hard to see how all these things are connected. Hopefully, we're helping you see exactly how they're connected.
There's one other person connected to Adnan Khashoggi.
Yeah, I didn't know this, but Dodi Al-Fayed, who was the boyfriend of Diana, who I think died along with her in that crash in the tunnel, he is also the nephew of Adnan Khashoggi.
Fascinating to me. I have always been fascinated by Princess Diana, so that connection was something I didn't know.
You put that death in the context of world affairs and realize that maybe she was beginning to be a national security threat to whoever may have killed her. And you realize it may not have been as accidental as some people originally said it was. So Adnan Khashoggi, keep an eye on that name. Keep an eye out on Iran-Contra because Epstein is coming back at you. There's one other person in the 1980s who had a little something to do with Adnan Khashoggi, and that is Donald Trump.
Listen about your acquisition of the boat this summer. The Princess, is that what I call
On
it?
a boat from Adnan Khashoggi, which was formerly called the Nabila. And it's a yacht. And
Adnan is the world's largest arms trader.
I hate to admit it. Actually, it was from the Sultan of Brunei because it was security for loan and a whole complicated thing. But
Now, what are those guys like?
oh, they're real sweethearts.
Are they mean, tough, foreboding guys?
Well, I'd say by nature, they're not the nicest guys in the world.
Yeah.
He actually seems quite nice.
Maybe in 1988, he had somewhat of a sense of humor.
Tell me what your time is.
1980s, Epstein is doing money laundering with Adnan.
Correct. We revealed that today.
1988, Trump buys this boat that was Adnan's.
The world's
Guess
largest
what?
boat at the time.
Guess what happened 1 year later in 1989?
What happened, Tracy?
He was seen on Ghislaine's father, Robert Maxwell's
That's correct.
yacht.
You're correct. And if I remember correctly, the conversation between Donald Trump, or as it was reported back then, between Donald Trump and Robert Maxwell, the Mossad spy turned media mogul, was that they were comparing yacht sizes. You know, my yacht's bigger than yours. And of course, we can tell you right now that Adnan Khashoggi's boat was bigger because it was the largest boat in the world at the time. It was even featured in a 7 movie. So good work.
Yeah.
You got some
Okay.
dot connecting skills over there.
Zed, this is where I'm going to step back and give everybody a little bit of a recap because
yeah.
what's coming up next in this show, mind blowing. Let's talk about this. We talked about Epstein and how he's connected to a lot of Israelis. Zeb has a source that says he was working for Israel as an asset. We talked about how Israeli spies have normally been allowed to freely act in the United States for many years. And then we come to the 2016 election. And where we're going to go now in the show is crazy and mind-blowing. Keep your eyes and your ears open. Let's start with Cambridge Analytica, Psy Group, and the IRAs.
We are going to take